Hi everyone. Thanks everyone for joining us today for our session on moving from a PhD into industry. We've got a fantastic panel today that I'm going to introduce to you in a minute. Thanks ever so much for joining us. So my name is Robert Bowles. I'm a Careers and Professional Development Advisor here at the AMRSC, Royal Society of Chemistry. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to the panel. So today we've got Zoe Ayres. Zoe, can you say hello?
Hello, everyone.
We've got Dara O'Brien.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Dara. And Sarah.
Hi, everyone.
And myself. I'm just going to ask everyone to just introduce themselves, just give us a quick overview of kind of who you are, and maybe just a potted history of kind of what your current role is, and that will just help put what we'll be talking about in context. So Zoe, maybe if we can start with you.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Zoe Ayres. I'm a senior scientist in the water industry. I'm working for Hach company. I lead a small team of researchers looking at new sensor development and new technology development, primarily looking at analytical science to do that. And the main aim of that work is to really help keep water safe. I'm also a British Standards Institute technical expert, so I work on national and international standardization related to the water industry. And I transitioned to industry about 3 years ago from a postdoc position. So yeah, that's me.
Fantastic, thanks Zoe. And I'll just mention as well, as you can see there, we've also got our Twitter handles on there. We probably won't have time during the webinar to kind of react to you in real time, but if you do want to kind of tweet us up afterwards, please do so. You can also ask questions as we go through as well. You should be able to put them into the chat box, so if you want to ask anything as we go through, and I'll try and get through as many of them as I can at the end. So if I can introduce Dara as well. Dara, can you tell the audience today a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm new to industry, actually. I've only just recently started a job at Exactmer. So I'm a business development and operations associate, and I've just finished my PhD in the University of Nottingham, where I was doing a mixture of polymer chemistry, organic chemistry, and a little bit of the biomedical application side of polymers as well.
Fantastic. And finally, Sarah, can you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do in your background?
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I work for CK Group. We're a scientific specialist recruitment consultancy. I've worked in recruitment for coming up to 10 years now, and in that time I've worked with a lot of PhD candidates and postdocs who are looking to transition from academia into industry.
Fantastic, thanks Sarah. So yeah, so hopefully we've got quite a nice range of people either that have made that transition themselves or that have also kind of helping other people make that transition. So I want to kind of move on to that a little bit and kind of, yes, actually get you guys talking a little bit about your background. I'll just kind of go through a bit of the plan of what we want to try and talk about today. So really, this is really, we want it to try and be as practical as we can. So really find out, so that you listening in, think about how you can make that move from after either completing a PhD or a couple of postdocs into that kind of industrial commercial sector. It is a transition that a lot of people struggle with. There's a number of reasons for that. We'll maybe get into that in a bit more detail. I wanted to talk a little bit about what a research career in industry might be like and how it is different from academia. So just to kind of help you realize, you know, what you might be going into and the kind of pros and cons of that. And then really, this is really something that I think certainly Dara and Sarah can really kind of talk a lot about from their recent experiences, but also Zoe as well, you know, what are employers looking for, and actually how you can kind of present what you do in your research to make yourself attractive to an employer. And then we'll finish off with a little bit about kind of where and how to look. Now, most of our panelists today, we're all UK based. Apologies for that. But I think a lot of what we're going to be talking about will be kind of transferable across different countries and different sectors as well. But we will mainly be focusing on the UK just because that's what we know most about. So I'm going to start off with this question first. Maybe, Dara, if we can ask you this question. You made that transition most recently. Why did you kind of leave that academic world, a world that you've known about for a long time? You know, you've done your degree, your PhD. Why did you make that transition? What was your thought process behind it?
Well, for me, I think I could never really see myself in an academic career. So I wasn't 100% set against doing a postdoc. I would have quite enjoyed that in a way, but ultimately I didn't see myself like staying in academia in the long term and becoming an academic. So in that sense, while I did like, you know, keep an open mind to postdocs, like essentially there was nothing stopping me from just making that leap straight away and into industry. Essentially, you know, I just wanted a change from kind of the academic side of things. I didn't see myself becoming like a PI or like a lecturer or anything like that. So so essentially that's why it appealed to me, why going to industry appealed to me.
So it seemed quite an obvious thing to do, really. You kind of looked at what the academic career path had to offer and made a kind of positive decision to go and do something else.
That's it, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And what about yourself, Zoe?
I think for me, I think I could have probably stuck around in academia if I'd felt like it was something that I could have survived and thrived in. But I think the really the precarity of contracts is one of the things that really kind of got me with industry, in the sense that like I was constantly having to reapply for postdocs and fight for, it kind of felt like fighting for my existence and I just wanted something permanent, you know, and something that pays a little bit better, and actually just enables me to have a little bit more work-life balance. So that's kind of what the appeal to industry was for me.
And a bit more stability, not that constant churn, always thinking about what comes next.
Yeah, I mean, like, in fact, I've got a permanent job now. I mean, people say, well, there's a lot of stability in academia. Well, I see stability here as well, and I enjoy that, you know.
Fantastic. And Sarah, you obviously recruit a lot of kind of PhDs into the roles that you work with your clients on. Do you get a sense for, are those similar themes for the people that you talk with about why they're making that change?
I think that everyone has their own circumstances, so everyone will have their own reasons for wanting to transfer out. I think sometimes it's wanting to see an end product as well. So where in academia you might be doing a lot of fundamental research, you won't necessarily see the fruits of that in the market. So that's certainly something that people mention. Definitely stability and not wanting to have to move house every 2 years and move to a different geography. You know, being able to stay in one place is definitely attractive. And I think also the career progression. So it's not a fight for who's got the most papers and who's published in the most prestigious journals. You know, there is very much more a meritocracy, I would say, in industry, or it seems that that's my perception of it, that, you know, your chances for progression are related to what impact you've had on the business.
Absolutely. And I remember excuse me, I remember like someone once said to me, you know, people stay in academia because it's so competitive in industry, and actually I'd completely flip that over on its head. I think that the kind of dog-eat-dog competitive nature of modern academic careers is really, certainly my experience working in industry and outside of academia, there is much more scope for collaboration as well. You know, you're all quite often working towards a common goal rather than kind of directly competing with each other for the same pots of funding. Brilliant. That's really good insight from all of you. Thank you. So moving on, how, this is a bit more of an open-ended question. Dara, kind of, can you tell us a little bit about your approach, about how you started? Did you start searching your options? Did you start kind of seeing what was out there? Did you just start applying for jobs direct? How did you kind of make that transition?
Yeah, I'm kind of nervous to answer this one because I definitely don't think I did it the correct way or anything like that. But essentially, I've just been keeping an eye out, usually on LinkedIn, but also other websites like jobs.ac.uk, although I did find that to be like really academic focused. And even just like Googling jobs. Twitter I found really useful for following companies and just keeping an eye out, seeing what they're doing and like if they might be hiring. Half of it for me was like knowing that companies existed. So I had an idea in my head that I wanted to move to London, but then I still wanted to do something scientific. So it was, you know, there's not a lot in the center of London that's sort of like a really science-based job. So I was kind of struggling to find like different companies that do science, and a lot of the times in London they'd be startups. So so just keeping an eye out on LinkedIn and Twitter and things, and like trying to even just sometimes I would Google like polymer companies just to find out where they were, and then keep an eye out on their websites and see when they were hiring. And then, like you say, I kind of just applied everywhere, including postdocs, everything, and then see what stuck, and decided, you know, once I got offers of interviews and things like that, that's how I made my mind up. So it's certainly no hard science behind it, but just kind of doing everything.
No, and I think that's an approach I definitely advocate. You know, I think if you just rely on one different channel trying to find a job, it will take a lot longer. And can I just get a sense from you, Dara, kind of how long it took, how many applications, how many interviews you had before you were
Yeah,
successful?
it was definitely a lot of applications. I think I probably applied for like at least 20, if not 25, 30 jobs. I lost count.
Hmm.
And then I got interviewed for probably only about 5 of those.
Yeah,
And then you know, sometimes re-interviewed and obviously got my job. I started looking probably last summer, but it was kind of complicated because at the time I was finishing my PhD and thought it would end in the end of September when I submitted, but then I got an extension because of COVID.
yeah.
So it was a bit probably longer than most people need, but I've been keeping an eye out since like the last summer on what kind of jobs were out there. And then
Hmm.
I started fully applying around Christmas time this year.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Yeah.
And what about you, Zoe? You made that change a while ago. Can you remember much about kind of how you approached it? And
Very, very similar to Dara. So I don't know about the right way to do it. Just looking on LinkedIn, looking on Twitter. One of the things that I think it was like actually starting earlier than I think some people do. Like I think again, like I was looking at like maybe a year ahead of time to just kind of understand what the background was, like, you know, where the companies are, which companies are interesting. Also going to conferences and stuff. Like obviously we're not really able to go to in-person conferences at the moment,
yeah,
but when I was going to conferences, I was taking people's cards and having conversations with people about what sort of research they did. So it was a combination of me both knowing the research team at my company and knowing a few people there, and understanding that the work culture was something that I would be I would find good for me, and the fact that a job came up that then I could combine the two and apply and get to where I got to. So
fantastic. And Sarah, from your point of view, you're kind of involved in active recruitment, you know, every day. It's your job. You know, do you have any kind of tips or advice on kind of where people should look, how they should look, how they should approach finding
Yeah,
those roles?
I mean, I would follow up on what Zoe and Dara were saying and say there is no right way to do it. So don't worry on that front. I think however you get a job, you know, that's the right way for you. It's interesting that you both mentioned Twitter, because that is not somewhere that I ever use myself. So I might actually ask you a bit about that afterwards and how you kind of went about that. I would say for me the kind of main places that we use are LinkedIn. So make sure you've got a LinkedIn profile that's up to date, that you're in some groups, that you're networking on there. Indeed is probably the best place to search for jobs, because it aggregates jobs from all over the internet and puts them all in one place. And then there's the kind of the standard job boards like CV Library, Total Jobs, New Scientist Jobs. There's you know, if you search jobs in science, there'll be a lot that come up for you, I'm sure, on
Fantastic.
Google.
So
And then hopefully work with us as well.
yeah,
Sorry, last little one
no,
that I'll put in there. So yeah, find a good scientific recruiter who can advise. And you know, we're not just here to get you a job. We can offer advice. We can offer guidance as well.
great
So,
stuff. So yeah, I'm just going to put the challenge to all of you listening. You know, you're all, if you're doing a PhD or a postdoc, you're all excellent researchers, or you wouldn't have got to where you are currently. So, you know, the onus is very much on you to use those research skills kind of with a view to kind of making some decisions about your career as well. If we kind of move on again a bit more, this is something that you know, I know people sometimes have concerns about. It's not always that they think, you know, how is that industry and academia different? How are they the same? You know, quite often it's that leap into the unknown is quite often what holds people back. Zoe, can we maybe start with you? You know, how have you found that you've obviously had more experience now in the industry compared to kind of postdoc in the academia? How have you made that? Have you made that change? What kind of, how do you recognise it's different kind of within industry and academia? You talked about the sorry, having that permanent contract. That obviously is a big thing for you. What other kind of things have you noticed about being the same or different?
So when I started looking at industrial jobs, I remember distinctly someone in academia saying to me, well, you're not going to be able to be creative in industry. Like, you're not going to be able to do creative science in industry. And that really panicked me for a while, because I love doing my research. I love doing new things. I love finding new things. And so when I was applying for jobs, I was always in the back of my mind that this was going to be a transition that was better for me, but I was going to lose that science aspect of the work that I do. And I can categorically say now that I absolutely did not lose that. I have the ability to run down completely new research ideas. And this is obviously going to depend on the company that you join. And I think this is the sort of questions that you probably need to be asking on interview. But like, I have the ability to go and do new science. I get the freedom to go and run my own research projects. There is a caveat of, like, you know, sometimes there are time pressures, and sometimes we have to say, okay, well, we don't think this project is feasible in X amount of time, so we have to move on. But actually do get to do some really cool science. I just don't get to talk about it as much because we have to keep it all quiet. But yeah, so I actually found it surprisingly, I know, I find it refreshing, and I find it like I'm still doing a lot of almost academic research with the role that I have.
Great stuff. And what about you, Dara? Tell us a little bit more about what you do day to day.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there's like this huge myth in academia that because, you know, you're only really hearing from academia, or for me personally as well, academia was all I knew. I don't really know anybody who, well, apart from like friends who've moved on to industry, it was all new and unexpected. But there's definitely this myth that you know, you're not able to design your own projects, or there's no kind of freedom of being like scientific research. But it's definitely not true. It's definitely far more similar than people would have you believe. Obviously, in the role I'm in now, I don't do the science myself. I'm like in the office, but Exactmer is quite a small company. It's just moving from the stage of a startup to the stage of a kind of a bigger business. And certainly for startups, there's definitely a very academic feel, especially for, you know, this was a spin out from Imperial, so a lot of the staff there come from Imperial, so there's almost, it almost feels a bit too academic sometimes. But definitely the science is all like very, very similar. There's a lot of like design in it, and you constantly have to be thinking like you know, trying to work through challenges, scientific challenges, and it seems very similar in that sense.
Great stuff. And I think that point about different types of companies is really important to think about as well. I think everyone thinks, or industry, you know, is big global multinationals. Actually, a lot of the people that we know that work within the RSC, within industry, our membership, probably 80% of them work for kind of SMEs, so small to medium enterprises, so up to 250 employees, kind of relatively lower turnover. But actually, as you know, as Dara made the point there, actually these have some really interesting jobs where you get exposed to doing lots of different things, a real variety in the role, a very kind of collegiate approach. Sometimes you're all in it together. So those companies can be harder to find because they're not household names. So again, you need to do the research to try and find, you know, where they are, where they're based. We'll get onto kind of where to look a bit more. But the variety of companies that you can end up working for is really worth exploring in a bit more detail. Moving on a bit, I'm going to gloss over this because it's much more interesting listening to our panelists today. But just really think about the types of companies and the types of industries and sectors that chemists can work in. It's really huge. And again, I'd emphasize the onus is very much on you to go out and explore the sectors, you know, from raw materials right through to those applied fine chemical roles and all the support industries around it, you know, the analytical instruments, distribution technology. There's a whole wealth of roles that are open to kind of chemists with a PhD. So, go out and explore it, find out what's out there, find out what interests you, what matches your kind of values, and that can be really positive experience for everyone as they start to do their job searching. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, just really to kind of talk about, this is really about career progression. So again, it's kind of where can I go, what can I do? Zoe, how have you found that career progression as you've kind of gone on? You've obviously been in industry a few times. I see you kind of changed your job role a couple of times.
Yeah.
How have you found that?
So I joined the company as a research scientist, and like I guess a kind of highlighting what you went back to earlier about things being more of a meritocracy. Like I showed for a few years that I was performing above my position, and then I got promoted recently to senior scientist, and that's taken just under 3 years to get to that position. And again, that will be company dependent, but I could evidence that I was doing the job above me, and it was then much easier to then say, actually, I think I should be considered for a promotion. And they were very supportive in that sense. And I actually used my Chartered Chemist award through the Royal Society of Chemistry as another way to kind of say, well, actually, I'm ready to move on to do more team lead sort of positions. So that was really useful to me as well. So yeah, there is a clear route up, and then when you get up to where I am now, it's kind of understanding whether you want to go more into people management, whether I want to stay in the lab, whether or not I might want to go more into like the regulation side of things. And I'm constantly having conversations as to where I might end up wanting to be, which I think is really refreshing.
Great stuff. And Dara, you're still quite early on in that journey. Can you see a path forward for yourself?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things as well that I didn't realize until I was kind of in outside of academia was that I didn't realize how many different types of jobs there are. So even in the role I'm in now, I didn't really know what it was until I interviewed for it, to be honest with you. And now I can see that there's actually a lot of different avenues that you can go into in industry. Like, yes, you can be in the lab, of course, and you can like do different things there. But then there's a wealth of different like types of jobs, which you can kind of use as a stepping stone, or stepping stones towards what you like, finding out what you want to be. So once you leave academia, you don't have to be stuck in the role that you're in forever. Like you can, well, it's true of academia too, but you can quit at any time and start something else, and it doesn't, make you look bad or anything like that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And that's certainly something I see talking to PhDs and postdocs is kind of, that fear of making a wrong decision. And actually, I don't know what my first job is going to be. And that perception I'm going to be doing it forever. And actually, get out there, try something different, find out what you like, find out what you don't like, and use that experience to build your career.
I think
Sarah,
as well, if you,
Dara, carry on.
but if you do want to go into industry, what I would really recommend just starting in any role. Like I did do for 3 months, like a role that I didn't enjoy a lot, but I think the fact that you can just even put it on your CV and show that somebody's willing to hire you and that you have some experience of industry means that you're so much more likely to make that next step. And then get a role you do like a little bit better. So I think just get in there, and then you can start moving up the ranks or whatever it is, getting into what you really want to do.
That's a really good point. Thanks, Dara. And Sarah, can you talk a little bit about kind of entry roles for kind of PhDs or postdocs? It's something I get asked about. What level should I be? What sort of level role should I be looking at? What sort of job title should I be looking for? Sometimes it's hard for a PhD to kind of know how to pitch themselves to an employer. Have you got any advice around that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because I actually had a call with a candidate last week after I did a similar talk to this, who said to me, how do I get into lab management? And I was like, well, you need to get into a lab first. So what I would say is don't kind of your PhD isn't wasted if you don't go into a senior role straight away. I would say sort of a chemist or a scientist job title is what I would usually expect for someone going into their first role from a PhD or indeed a postdoc. It would be unlikely that you'd go straight into industry and into people management.
Yeah.
I would also add, I know you've kind of got that pyramid there, but what I would say is a lot of organizations will have two pyramids almost, so you
Yeah.
don't have to go into people management. And certainly, speaking from my personal experience, I have been a people manager and found I absolutely hated managing people, and so I've gone down a sort of a technical route within our business, albeit not in a laboratory based role.
Yeah.
And a lot of organizations will have a similar sort of route for progression, where you can go into things like principal scientist or technical expert sort of positions, which don't necessarily have people management as part of the remit, but is still, it would still represent progression. But yeah, so for entry level roles, I'd say, chemist, scientist is a good place to start, but it's so diverse and so there's the industry, you can go into a multitude of different roles, so it's really difficult to name all of them.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Sarah. Yeah, I need to go away and change my slides for the next one. No, it's a really good point actually, and is that kind of two pathway. The technical specialist against the kind of people manager specialist is a really important point to make. This is another question that we get asked a lot about. I think when people are doing their PhDs, their postdocs, you're so caught up in the science, you think that's what people are going to be hiring you on. Dara, if we can start with you, can we talk a little bit about how much of your science, maybe how much of your PhD that you've used is directly relevant to the role that you're kind of now doing?
Yeah, I mean, definitely knowing your science is part of it, like absolutely. But I think don't worry too much on specific techniques that you haven't got. What you want to be able to show is that you're able to learn quickly, I would think, although I'm not hiring anybody, so can't say
Yeah.
specifically.
Mm-hmm.
But what I like about my role at the moment is that I still get involved in the science and hear it, but it's all like on paper. I don't really get bogged down with the lab side of it. And then I have to use my other skills, even just like things like Excel is really important. People skills is like really important. A lot of the time in interviews, you'll be asked to like present some of your work. So being able to present and just communicate, especially these days, because it's all online, I think that's like really, really important. And being able to just like I say, communicate and get across, what you know and what you don't know. That's fine. I think if you don't know something, definitely don't pretend you know it. Just say you don't know it, but always like with a kind of positive spin that you'd be like a quick learner or something like that.
Yeah.
That you're willing to be taught it. It's important, I would say.
Fantastic. What about you? Your thoughts on this, Sarah?
So I think for me, so I did a master's in analytical science and I did my PhD in electrochemistry, and I've definitely fallen back more to my master's kind of training where it was more broad. So we look at a lot of different analytical techniques, so it's not one specific area. So it's really the whole aim is to become an expert on something quite quickly if we're looking at something new. So again, it's kind of like drawing on that ability to learn and learn quickly so that you can ask some questions. And really with any research, what we're looking to do is find the limits of that research, because if we don't know where a new technology fails, then it's a huge risk for us. So actually what we're doing is running down those risks. So actually it's like things like, like maybe simple analytical things like thinking about what the linearity of a technique is and things like that, and actually thinking about where that technique might drop out and might not work for us. So I think it's really thinking more back on the skill sets that we have as scientists in general.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the other thing I would say, which I guess kind of mirrors what's already been said, is just the science communication aspect of this. Like, we're so often having conversations with different stakeholders, whether it's people from different companies or people higher up in the business side of the company, and you have to be able to produce like 1 or 2 page summaries of the work that you're doing and really communicate that quite directly and quite succinctly. So I think that's quite important as well.
Thanks very much. Sarah, what do you think about what I put on the screen there about that kind of how you communicate your skills, how you communicate your science from the recruiter's point of view? Is that something that a lot of scientists struggle with?
I think it's a balancing act. I think I have some candidates who will get in touch with me and I'll say, what have you done? Tell me about your background. And they'll say, well, I've worked in a lab, and they'll talk a lot about their soft skills and they don't actually tell me about the science they've been involved in. And that can be quite difficult sometimes, actually, getting to the bottom of what science you have done. So I would say your science is still important. Don't forget about that. But
Mm-hmm.
also, on the other side of things, a lot of our clients will say to me, I can teach X, Y, Z. I need these skills, but what I really want is a good person fit. So
Yeah.
I think it's a balancing act between the sort of the softer skills, your things like being able to learn, being able to communicate with people, and being able to communicate that science succinctly, but also in a level of depth that's going to be enough for a recruiter to get what they need from it. So a recruiter being me or the hiring manager, they still want to know about your science as well.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thanks a lot. So I'm gonna gloss over this, but it's just to kind of reinforce that point that there's a lot of other skills that you do need to be demonstrating, but you do need to be putting your science in a bit of context as well. Yeah, as Sarah said, you need a mix of both, be able to communicate that. So there's great places. Luckily, you don't have to work this out for yourself. Employers are very good at explaining what they're looking for. They spend a lot of effort and time writing job descriptions, writing adverts, writing person specs. And so again, use your research skills to find out what skills employers are valuing. Think about how you're going to demonstrate it. There's some job websites we put up there. Don't forget there's also sort of specialist recruitment sites as well. So a lot of industries and sectors have kind of specialist recruitment sites. So, just do explore what's out there. And, even if you're not ready to kind of look for a job right now at the moment, start thinking, just spend time looking at job adverts, learn the language, learn what skills are valued, and then think about how you're going to demonstrate that to a future employer as well. I'm going to move on a bit more about kind of some practical tips, so kind of where to look. So certainly from the comments that we talked about earlier on with Dara and Zoe, that multi-channel approach to job hunting is really important. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't just rely on job alerts. Be looking on LinkedIn, be looking in other events. It's brilliant. All the channels that I mentioned there are stuff that Zoe and Sarah and Dara mentioned earlier on. Sarah, do you just want to talk a little bit more about kind of working with recruitment agencies and what they can do and how you should make the most of that sort of a relationship?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I would say, as much as I would like to work with every single one of you, have a look around and find a recruitment consultancy that seems to work for you. So it could be, if you're in a specific area of science, there might be one that's got more jobs that seem relevant to you. So you can find people on LinkedIn, find people on the job boards. A lot of people will be, a lot of these companies will be advertising for jobs. And what I would say is the first thing to do is drop a CV through to people. If you don't have one, put something together. And drop a CV through, and that's the first thing, is that if we've got a CV in front of us, then we can instantly sort of think about the sorts of positions you might be suited to. I would follow up with a phone call, always follow up with a phone call. So for example, on our database, you can register for our database. No, that doesn't tell me that you've registered. I don't find your CV unless I go searching for specific key terms. And so I would say always make contact with someone. Phone calls are better because you've got my attention then, whereas an email, I might kind of put it in the box to deal with later, and you don't get the level of kind of depth you would get from a conversation with someone, and also it's going to make you stand out. I would say have a tick list in your head of what sorts of things you're looking to get out of both the conversation and your career. So if you can give us an idea as to what you're looking for, then we can usually suggest some organisations or some jobs that we've got live at the moment that might be worth an approach to. So yeah, I mean, I would say just communication is key. If you're not interested in something, don't pretend you are. Tell us that, that's not going to be suited for me because of these reasons, as well. So just really open, transparent, and get a bit of a dialogue going with someone.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Sarah. Yeah, so I'm just going to kind of get a bit more into some other areas. We're lucky within the kind of chemical sciences sectors. There's a lot of industry sectors. There's a lot of trade bodies. So I put a couple of examples there. That CFIC, they're basically the European Council for the chemical industry. They have lists of their membership companies that work with. The ABPI, that's basically the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry. So there's all these kind of sectors that have kind of huge lists of companies that work in areas that might interest you. Quite often on their websites they would have lists of their members. So again, it's a kind of good starting for you to kind of point for you to try and work out what companies are out there, where you might want to start looking, draw up a hit list of companies that you might want to approach or start to follow on LinkedIn maybe. There's a lot of other opportunity around sort of business and science and innovation parks as well. They're quite often clustered around sort of universities and towns with universities. Again, quite often they can be quite a wide range of kind of smaller to larger companies. So, if you happen to be lucky enough to live close to one, while you're in lockdown, why not just go for a drive or a cycle round, just get a feel for who's there. So again, I'm getting a bit bored with saying this, but use your research skills to kind of find out where these companies are. Dara made that great example of just researching, just typing polymer companies into Google. If there's a particular area that is kind of linked to your PhD, then you can definitely do that. We've mentioned Indeed, so this is just a kind of search from Indeed. I just put in chemist. I think I put in PhD chemist as well. It's not come up here, but actually there's 11 different sectors came up on that search. So again, use it not just to look for jobs, but also to look for ideas of industries or sectors and job titles that you might want to follow up on. And actually now is a really good time to be kind of getting ready. So that point, I think as Dara made earlier on about, knowing when to start looking is a really important one. Sarah, what are your thoughts on kind of when, if someone's coming towards the end of their PhD, are employers waiting for you to complete? Are they happy to kind of start talking to you before you've submitted?
I would say
is there a kind of sweet spot around there about where to start looking?
It's generally, I would say, look passively at any point and get a feel for the industry. But in terms of actively applying for roles, it's a much quicker turnaround in industry than it is in academia, I would suggest. So most of the time, if an organisation comes to me to find a candidate, it's because they have a position that they need to fill. And generally there's a business cost for them not filling that position. So they'll wait within reason, but generally not, if you don't have an idea in your head as to when you're going to submit, some people will say to me, oh, I'm going to submit in December, and April comes around and they're like, oh, well, I'm not sure yet. I haven't quite, I've had a bit of an extension. So I would say it's, get a realistic timescale in your head. And if you talk sort of 3 months in advance of that is when to start really actively applying for roles. Maybe 3 to 6 months, I would say maximum, because most organisations won't wait longer than 3 months from interview to someone starting, or from offer to someone starting, I should say.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And something I'm just going to add to that as well is, if you are kind of at the point of getting ready to start applying, if you've got to kind of be prepared to communicate that date to your employers as well. So for example, on your CV, you might put, I'm doing a CV, I'm doing a PhD, consider putting your expected submission date on the CV so that the employer knows exactly when you might be available. And again, that can kind of help them to get a feel for when you might be able to start with them. there's a few things on there to kind of think about. We've covered some of it off already. So, you know, researching companies and organizations you might want to work with. Networking is a good thing you can be starting to think about at the moment. So I put up there, set up informational interviews. So, you know, go on LinkedIn, maybe start, for example, with companies you might want to work for. Maybe start to see if maybe there's alumni from your university, from your research group that are working in that company. You know, can you reach out to them and have a conversation? Maybe you want to learn more about a particular industry or a particular sector before you join it. You know, actually, you know, think about, oh, you know, can someone spend, you know, 10 minutes talking about what their job is, what their company's like, or their sector's like to work through. You know, you can start getting your CV and your LinkedIn profile ready at any time. Sarah, can we just ask you, you know, you spend a lot of time looking at on LinkedIn and profiles. Is there any kind of key points you'd like to kind of share with our audience today about what you look for in a LinkedIn profile?
Yeah, I mean, I would say make sure that your LinkedIn is full and representative of what you do. So not just a title and an institution, you know, so maybe putting a brief overview of the research that you've been involved in, just a paragraph or so would be really useful. There's a skills section on LinkedIn that you can add as well. So that's worthwhile doing. You know, for example, if you've got a background in analytical chemistry and you've used HPLC, you might just want to tag HPLC as a skill. The added benefit of putting skills on both your CV and on your LinkedIn is that recruiters will search based on those key skills a lot of the time. So we put keywords into databases and we look for those. So if it's not on your CV, if it's not on your LinkedIn profile, you're not going to come up on a search, basically. And then the other thing is you can get recommendations on your LinkedIn profile as well. So you could ask colleagues or supervisors for a recommendation, and that'll go on the bottom of your LinkedIn profile. You get to review it before it goes on there as well, but you can ask them to do that as well.
Great, thanks very much, Sarah. So yeah, also be aware, you know, that the language and the job titles that you search for. You know, Dara and Zoe both mentioned about how their roles are quite niche, quite specialist. Different organisations call the same job different things. So again, you need to kind of have an awareness of, you know, different job titles and what you might want to be searching for, so that you don't miss out on any different opportunities. Yeah, so I mean, this is me with my career advisor's hat on now. You know, I'm not saying you need a career plan, but, you know, set aside some time to kind of be quite proactive. It's quite easy to kind of be a bit overwhelmed. You know, we've talked about a lot of things today. You know, where do you start? Actually, if you start to break that down into smaller tasks, so one day you might be gathering ideas for job titles, another day you might be gathering information on potential employers, you might spend another day trying to set up some informational interviews. Then you're in a position to kind of start applying for jobs. You don't have to do it all at once. You know, be kind to yourselves, but actually, you know, think about, actually, when am I going to set aside time to do this stuff, because that's really, really important to kind of maximize the chances of being successful. You know, and as Dara said early on, it is a numbers game. You do have to kind of keep going. So you know, be focusing on your technical skills as well as your personal skills as well. There is more support available from the AMRSC. We're just kind of wrapping up now, so I would just kind of, we have had some great questions coming in. If you have any questions, do please type them in as well. If you did want more support with your career searching or your job searching, we're happy to do that. If you're an AMRSC member, there's information on the website there about how to go about it. While you're having to think about that, I'm going to go through some of the questions. So this is a question from Raquel. She's pleased to see kind of women talking about their career and their progress in industry. She wanted to know if you think it's more challenging for women. I guess you've got nothing to kind of compare that against, but any thoughts on that? Have you encountered any challenges related to your gender at all? Any of you?
I wouldn't say, oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I wouldn't say it's
Dara, go first.
necessarily harder for women, but certainly the jobs in around being a scientist are not very friendly towards the lifestyles that women often have. So while employers may not think themselves extremely prejudiced in that sense that they don't want to hire women. Often, it's what I didn't want to be in the lab all the time, and it's what pushed me into, a less lab-based role. So there's that aspect to it, definitely. So, while I'm lucky enough to say that, like, I personally haven't like seen any prejudice, I definitely think there is that aspect to it. Also, certainly in something like chemistry, often you get asked, are you sure you're going to be able to lift like heavy items, which is like, fair enough, and often women might be smaller or like less strong and not able to. So maybe in that sense, I don't know if the others would say the same.
Zoe, any thoughts from you?
I mean, I hate to say this, but I think one of the things I've found is that certain industries will say, "Are you sure a woman will settle in this environment?" Some of maybe the dirtier end of chemicals, things like the waste industry. It's maybe something that there is an additional barrier that a woman needs to overcome. And as a feminist, I'm quite proactive in making sure that women are represented appropriately and are put forward for those roles. But yeah, I mean, there are definite barriers to women. I think anyone who suggests otherwise would be ill-informed, I think.
Zoe, you're going to add something as well.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I mean, yeah, I agree that, like, to say that there's no barriers for women is obviously not true. And I think the Royal Society of Chemistry have put out some diversity reports recently around that, and they're really worth reading if you haven't. One of the things I would say is it's probably one of the reasons that I did go into industry in the first place, because I actually get to have the work-life balance that I couldn't find in academia. So, like, I don't work weekends ever anymore. I have flexible working, so like if I can really kind of fit my work around me and my schedule, rather than, at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is that I get the work done, not when. So I think that's been really useful for me.
Great stuff. So here's a question from Fareshte, asking about roles that ask for kind of work experience, and it's hard to get that while you're at university. Sarah, how would you kind of suggest kind of someone that's been through a degree, a PhD, maybe doesn't have much experience outside of that environment, should they be applying for those roles? How might they present themselves for a role that maybe asks for kind of experience?
I mean, it doesn't hurt to apply for those roles. What I would say is there are roles out there that do not require experience and don't require industry or commercial experience. So, I would say don't be disheartened if you do see that on a job advert. It doesn't mean there's not a job out there for you. Certainly still apply. If you tick 10 out of 12 of the boxes, or 5 out of 10 of the boxes, then apply. It doesn't hurt to apply for something, and you never know, it might be that you happen to be the candidate that really stands out from that. So I don't think it ever hurts in applying for something that you don't meet all of the criteria for. And actually, the other benefit of doing that is if there is another hiring manager in an organization, or if it's through a recruiter, we might have other jobs, and it might just open up a conversation, get your CV in front of another another hiring manager. And interestingly, actually, there was a PhD candidate that I placed a few years ago, and we put her forward for one department. Her CV got passed to another department. She ended up in a completely different department. So, it does happen. So it's still worth applying to them. I would say there are some jobs that you can't get around that. They do need that level of experience because that's a gap within their organization, and they need someone with those skills. But that doesn't mean that there's not a role out there for you, or there's not a role within that organization for you.
And this is kind of related to this. This is a question from Emma. She's saying, as a PhD, do you end up in the same jobs as after doing a master's? Where's the added value in a PhD? Sarah, you're probably best placed to kind of talk about that.
I I would say it depends on the area of chemistry that you're going into. I would say there are certain positions that I recruit for that will not consider a master's or a bachelor's
Okay.
qualified candidate
Yeah.
unless they've got maybe 4 or 5 years industrial experience. That kind of brings them up to a similar level of experience as a PhD. But you know, there are a lot of positions which just wouldn't be open to someone with a master's or a bachelor's.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, Zoe, you know, as you've made your career progression through your roles, do you think having the PhD has helped you with that?
Yeah, and I think that one of the motivations behind me getting a PhD was actually me having a conversation with someone in industry when I was doing my master's degree, and talking about the glass ceiling that exists that you end up hitting if you have your master's degree and you don't have a PhD. And it's possible to get around that by, as just what's just been said by Sarah, by having like years of industrial experience. But at the same time, I think the PhD does open those doors, and I've definitely benefited from that. I know for our company, at least in the research roles that I'm occupying, we only recruit with people with PhDs. So
Brilliant. We've also got a question here, a general one from Jerry, asking, do companies have a preference for whether we apply via recruiter or direct with the same company? I think I know Sarah's answer to that one, but I mean, I'd just make the point that, you know, every company is different. So, you know, some companies don't find the need to work with recruiters. You know, that they have a large pool of candidates they can seek for. Some companies use recruitment companies to kind of fill a very specialist niche role that they have struggled fulfilling. So every kind of, I don't think there's any hard or fast rules on that. Sarah, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that's fair. I mean, there are organizations that will say, you know, we don't use recruiters, please apply direct, and that's fine. You know, they've got the capacity to recruit for themselves. Other organizations outsource to us because they maybe don't have the skills in-house, or they don't have the ability to attract the sort of candidates that they need to. So some organizations will ask us to support them with, you know, searching for a job and presenting candidates. Other organizations might outsource their entire recruitment function to us. So for example, there's an organization in Cambridge at the moment where if you apply directly to them, your CV gets forwarded on to us anyway. So, you know, there's some companies where you just can't get around using a recruiter.
Yeah.
In my experience as well, just to add on to that really quick, if we're really struggling to fill a role, then we will maybe get a recruitment agency in to help us. But that means as well that, like, especially a smaller or small medium company, if you can just email your CV when you need a job, especially if it says on the website that they recruit all the time, email your CV in, and then sometimes if there's a job to fill in a month's time, they might contact you. For my job, I applied actually in November and didn't hear back anything until January, and they said, oh, have you finished your PhD now, essentially? Are you ready to come work for us? So that's always useful. And so if you pop a CV in and then you don't hear anything back for a few months, like 6 months later, I think it'd be worth like sending it again. It might have just got lost, or they might be re-recruiting or something like that.
Great. We're nearly at the end of the time. I've just got one more question I'm going to ask. Apologies, we've had loads of people on today. We've not been able to get through all of the questions. I'd say if you do have any more questions or anything specifically about your personal circumstances, if you are an AMRSC member, you can drop us an email via the email on the screen at the moment, and myself and my colleagues will get back to you. I'm just going to finish off with this one. This is from Sarah. Sarah, she said she's in her late 40s, come out of industry to do a PhD in 2015. And now, having previously worked in industry, she's looking to kind of re-enter the job market, having almost finished her PhD. Are employers likely to view that as an advantage or a disadvantage, having been out of industry for a few years? What are your thoughts on that? Sarah, maybe if we can ask you on that, how would you approach kind of supporting that
It's a really
kind of client?
one with not knowing your background. I mean, if
Yeah,
the
of course.
PhD has been really relevant to what you're wanting to go into, then I would say that's definitely a benefit. You know, it's an
Hmm.
additional for, you know, however many years you've been in academia, but it's an additional number of years of experience in that specific area, and
Yeah,
you've also upskilled yourself academically. So you know, I would say if it's in the directly related to what you want to go into, then absolutely it's a benefit. If it's not quite so related and you want to go back to what you did before and that's different, then it's a different matter. I guess if you wanted to ask, if, and this goes for everyone, if anyone wants to ask me specific questions, I'm easy enough to find, so feel free to get in touch after this. You know, I'm more than happy to chat
yeah,
with people about individual kind of
great
circumstances.
stuff. Brilliant. Um, we're nearly out of time now. Thanks ever so much for your time. Thanks for your great questions today. As I said, unfortunately we've not been able to get through to all of it. We've had nearly 300 people joining us today, so apologies if I've not got through to your question. As I said, if you did want to get in contact with us, my email on there, it is there on the screen at the moment. Dara, Sarah, Zoe, thanks ever so much for your time. Is there anything else that you'd like to kind of add before we sign off for today? Dara, maybe start from you.
Yeah,
Final
I was just
thoughts?
going to say that make sure to like use all the tools available at your disposal. So if you're in a university, most universities will have some sort of careers department, and they'll help you. Like the Royal Society, it's all over the screen here, is willing to help you with your careers. It can be really helpful to have somebody just look over your CV and just spot something that like you don't even know you're missing, or make some changes. So definitely like try to get all the advice you can and make sure you know, most of it's free, like I say, before applying.
Great stuff.
You might as
Zoe, what
well.
about your
Yeah.
thoughts?
One of the things I would say is, like, you know, if you're applying for jobs and you're not really sure about the jobs, but you get an interview, like go to the interview, because you get to practice your interview skills. And if you're not that bothered about the job, then it's a good like kind of ground to kind of practice those skills, so that when that job comes around that you really do want, then you've actually kind of developed those skill sets a little bit. So I would bear that in mind as well.
Great stuff. And Sarah, if we can finally finish some thoughts for you?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what Dara and Zoe have said. And likewise, if anyone wants to contact me for any advice, it's free for you to do that as well. So feel free to get in touch. And I would say keep an open mind. You know, don't necessarily think this is exactly what I have to do right now. You know, careers are quite flexible in industry and you can change. And, you know, there might be a role out there that is perfect for you, but not what you thought you would be doing in any,
Great.
you know, in any way. Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks ever so much for your time. Thanks very much for everyone that's joined us today. There's been some great questions. Hope you found this useful. We should be hoping to kind of make this available on YouTube at some point soon as well. So yeah, thanks a lot, and good luck with your future careers and your future job search, everyone. Thanks then. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you.
all.
Bye.